My name is Evelyn Vance, and I am 34 years old. 2 years ago, my younger sister, Clara, sat across from me in a dimly lit coffee shop and wept until I handed her husband, Marcus, a cashier's check for $850. That money was my entire inheritance from our late grandfather, combined with a decade of my own relentless saving. It was meant to be my security, my future, the foundation of a quiet life I had carefully planned. But last winter, when I finally asked for the scheduled repayment to begin, Marcus leaned back in his plush leather chair, swirled his expensive bourbon, and chuckled. "Evelyn, come on," he said, flashing that charismatic hollow smile. "Family doesn't send each other invoices." Clara, adjusting a diamond tennis bracelet that certainly hadn't come from my grandfather's trust, crossed her arms and called me petty. Even Marcus's mother, a woman who treated zip codes like royalty titles, stood in the foyer of their sprawling new mansion and loudly whispered that it was tasteless for a single woman to hound her successful sister over seed money. They thought they were dealing with Evelyn, the quiet, mousy older sister who wore sensible shoes and supposedly worked as a mid-level data entry clerk in a dusty corporate basement. They figured I would back down by the time Thanksgiving dinner rolled around, cowed by their glittering success and my own supposed insignificance. They forgot one fundamental detail, or perhaps they simply never bothered to learn it. Before I was the family's designated wallflower, before I was the sister they only called when they needed a favor, I spent 15 years building a career that thrives in the shadows. I don't type data into spreadsheets. I am a senior forensic auditor for the Federal Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I spend my days dissecting offshore accounts, untangling corporate shell companies, and deciding precisely how the federal government dismantles fraudulent empires. I know exactly how a bank retrieves its funds when a borrower decides they are above the law. So, I didn't scream, I didn't throw a tantrum, I just smiled, a cold, empty curve of the lips, and made a single phone call to a federal magistrate judge I have known for a decade. What happened at the prestigious Silicon Valley Tech Innovation Gala, standing in front of their lead venture capitalist and the editor-in-chief of the top tech journal? None of them saw it coming. The destruction was surgical, silent, and absolute. I am not proud of all the collateral damage, but I would do every single second of it again. Let me take you back to the beginning, back to when I still believed that family meant loyalty, not leverage. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments, and remember, this story is a testament to the danger of underestimating the quiet ones. I live in a modest, unassuming townhouse in the suburbs of Seattle. The rain is a constant companion here, and I like the quiet it brings. My life has always been defined by a sort of structured invisibility. When you do what I do, when your signature on a federal warrant can freeze a billionaire's assets before he finishes my stew's espresso, you learn the value of flying under the radar. I drive a reliable 5-year-old sedan, I wear neutral colors, I let my family think I am exactly what they want me to be, boring, safe, and easily manipulated. Clara has always been the opposite. She is 29, radiant, loud, and chronically dissatisfied. She married Marcus 5 years. Marcus is a man constructed entirely of buzzwords and hair gel. He is a visionary, a disruptor, the kind of guy who talks about synergy without ever actually producing anything of value. 3 years ago, they founded a financial technology startup called Apex Pay. According to their perfectly curated social media profiles, they were revolutionizing peer-to-peer lending. According to the truth, they were burning cash faster than a forest fire in August. It was November of 2023 when the illusion began to crack, at least behind closed doors. Clara came to my townhouse unannounced. It was raining, of course, and she looked genuinely terrified. She sat on my worn velvet sofa, shivering despite the heat being on full blast. "The venture capital firm pulled out," she blurted, tears spilling over her perfectly applied mascara. "Marcus overextended on the beta testing phase. We need a bridge loan, Evie. We just need a bridge to get to the Series A funding. If we don't get the capital now, they'll repossess the servers. We lose everything. I asked the dangerous question, the one I should have kept behind my teeth. How much do you need, Clara? 850,000, she whispered. The number hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I knew exactly what that number meant. It was the precise amount I had moved into a liquid trust just 3 weeks prior. It was my escape hatch, the culmination of a life lived cautiously. It was the money I was going to use to purchase a small independent consulting firm and finally be my own boss. Pulling it out meant delaying my own life, perhaps indefinitely. But she was my sister. I had held her when she scraped her knee at age 6. I had covered for her when she snuck out at 16. This was the woman I was supposed to protect. Okay, I said quietly. The relief on her face was instantaneous. A desperate, gasping sort of gratitude. But if we do this, I continued, my voice hardening, we do it properly. This is not a gift, Clara. This is a legally binding, secured commercial loan. I will draft the paperwork. She nodded frantically, wiping her eyes. Of course, Evie. Whatever you need, you're the best sister in the world. We'll pay you back with interest. I promise, as soon as the Series A closes, I drafted the promissory note myself, using the exact, impenetrable language I employed in federal indictments. It laid out a straightforward schedule, a 12-month grace period, followed by 36 monthly payments at 6% interest. The critical part, the clause that would become the linchpin of my vengeance, was the security agreement. The loan was secured against the intellectual property, the source code, and all physical assets of Apex Pay. We signed the documents 3 days later at my dining table. Marcus barely skimmed the pages. He signed with a flamboyant, sweeping motion, tossing the pen down with a laugh. You really went all out with the legal jargon, huh, Evie? He joked. Making it all official. He didn't ask what the security clause meant. Fraudsters rarely read the fine print when they are being handed a lifeline. I filed the document, stamped and notarized, into a fireproof safe in my home office. I truly believed in my naive, hopeful heart that it was merely a formality. The first payment was due in December of the following year. It was supposed to be a little over $25,000 a month. December came and went in a flurry of holiday parties I wasn't invited to. No payment, no phone call. January passed in silence. By February, I had a decision to make. My own plans were stalling. The firm I wanted to buy was entertaining other offers. So, on a bleak Tuesday afternoon, I called Marcus. Marcus, I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. The repayment schedule was supposed to initiate 2 months ago. I need to know the status of the transfer. That was when the pause happened, the heavy, calculating pause that I have heard from $100 million embezzlers, right before they lie. Evie, come on, he said, the warmth in his voice entirely synthetic. Family doesn't send each other invoices. We're right in the middle of a major expansion push. You know how it is. You wouldn't want to choke the golden goose right before it lays the egg. Would you? I didn't blink. I sat in my quiet kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. This wasn't an invoice, Marcus. It was a secured loan. I need the capital. We'll figure it out. Evie, he said dismissively, don't stress, it's bad for your complexion. And then, he hung up. He hung up on me. He took my future, bought himself a second chance, and hung up the phone. I didn't cry. I walked into my office, opened the fireproof safe, and took out the promissory note. The ink was still dark and sharp. The signatures were undeniable. The hurt was profound. Yes, but beneath the hurt, a cold, relentless machinery began to turn. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They had assumed my silence was weakness. They were about to learn that silence is merely the sound of someone taking aim. Clara called me 3 days after Marcus hung up on me. Her tone was completely different than the shivering, terrified woman who had sat on my couch, begging for salvation. It was crisp, patronizing, and utterly devoid of gratitude. Evie, she said, skipping any sort of greeting, Marcus told me you were harassing him about the bridge loan. I really didn't expect this from you, harassing. I repeated, keeping my voice perfectly level. I asked for the first scheduled repayment, Clara. It's 2 months overdue. That isn't harassment. It is a contractual obligation. I have a consulting firm acquisition pending, and my deposit deadline is rapidly approaching. She let out a sharp, exasperated sigh, the kind of sound a mother makes at a toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. God, Evie, you are being so incredibly selfish. Marcus is working 80-hour weeks trying to secure the Series B funding. He is carrying the weight of an entire company on his shoulders, and you're hyperventilating over a timeline. We are family. You should be supporting us, not trying to sabotage his momentum just because you're stressed about some tiny bookkeeping business. The word hung in the air like a noxious gas. Selfish. She had taken my entire inheritance, my future, and spun it so that asking for it back made me the villain. The isolation began shortly after that phone call. It didn't happen in a massive explosion of drama. It was a slow, deliberate freezing out. A death by 1,000 cancelled plans. The Sunday family dinners I usually attended were suddenly rescheduled, without my knowledge. Clara's text messages, usually rapid-fire complaints about her manicurist or her yoga instructor, slowed to a trickle and then stopped entirely. My mother, a woman who worshipped success and viewed my quiet life as a personal failure on her part, stopped calling to ask if I was dating anyone yet. I had become inconvenient. I was the ghost of a debt they preferred to pretend didn't exist. The story circulating through the family grapevine, which eventually reached me through a gossipy aunt, was a masterpiece of fiction. According to Clara, I was becoming difficult. I was obsessed with money, hovering over their success like a jealous vulture, and trying to nickel and dime my brilliant brother-in-law while he was busy changing the world of finance. They painted themselves as the beleaguered innovators, and me as the bitter, spinster sister clutching her pennies. I heard the lie for myself one rainy April afternoon. I had driven over to their new neighborhood to drop off a birthday gift for their golden retriever. A ridiculous gesture, I know, but I was still trying to cling to the fragile thread of family. As I walked up the sweeping driveway of their rented Silicon Valley estate, I saw the side door open. I could hear Clara's voice drifting out from the sprawling, marble-countered kitchen. She was on speakerphone with Marcus's mother, Eleanor. I know, Eleanor. It's exhausting, Clara was saying, her voice dripping with martyred exhaustion. Evie is just. She's so comfortable in her little rut, she doesn't even need the money right now. She lives in that tiny townhouse and drives a car from the Stone Age. She's just being dramatic to get attention, because she's jealous of the startup's press coverage. Eleanor's aristocratic scoff echoed through the phone. Well, darling, you know how these things go. Single women of a certain age get so terribly fixated. You'd think she would be proud to contribute to Marcus's genius instead of demanding to be reimbursed like a common loan shark. Real family doesn't charge interest, Clara. It's shameful. I froze on the porch, the beautifully wrapped dog toy, suddenly feeling heavy and absurd in my hands. I didn't knock. I didn't barge in and demand an apology. I set the gift down silently on the mat, turned around, and walked back to my reliable 5-year-old sedan. I drove home and sat in the dark for a very long time. I won't lie to you and say it didn't hurt. It felt like someone had driven a shard of ice between my ribs. She doesn't even need it. My sister, the woman whose tears had broken my resolve, had no concept of what I needed because she had never once bothered to ask. She had taken my life savings without knowing its true cost, and she had discarded my humanity to justify the theft. That night, around 2 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep. I walked into my office, the only room in the house that felt entirely mine. I opened the fireproof safe and pulled out the cream-colored folder containing the promissory note. The heavy legal paper felt solid and reassuring in my hands. I ran my fingers over Marcus's flamboyant signature. I read the security clause out loud to the empty room. For a decade, my family had seen a quiet, unremarkable woman who filed paperwork in a basement. They had constructed an entire reality based on my perceived weakness, and they had gambled my future on the assumption that I would simply absorb the loss. They had forgotten, or rather, they never cared to know, what I actually did for a living. I sat in the dark until the first gray light of dawn crept through the blinds. The pain in my chest was gone, replaced by a cold crystalline clarity. I wasn't crying anymore, I was auditing. There is a profound difference between the two, and Marcus was about to learn it the hard way. By the time the banks opened, I had a pot of black coffee brewing, and a legal pad filled with a very specific, very dangerous list of names in federal databases. I didn't need to hire a private investigator. I am the investigator. I started where I always start when dismantling a corporate fraud: the public record. People like Marcus leave a trail of arrogant arrogance everywhere they go. They believe the rules do not apply to them, which makes them sloppy. I logged into the county clerk's secure portal and pulled the Uniform Commercial Code filings. I needed to verify that my security interest in Apex Pay's assets, the intellectual property, the servers, the corporate accounts was still intact. It sat there, a digital landmine, quietly waiting to be stepped on. 18 months had passed, and neither Marcus, nor his hotshot lawyers, nor his venture capitalists had thought to run a deep-dive lean search on a company claiming to have a clean balance sheet. Why would they? They assumed the money was a gift from a gullible sister. With the UCC filing confirmed, I could have struck right then. I could have filed a default notice, seized the servers, and shut down Apex Pay by the end of the week. I had executed harsher takedowns against far more intimidating targets. But this wasn't just a target, this was my sister's husband, and despite the betrayal, a microscopic part of me still believed in giving them enough rope to either pull themselves out or hang themselves completely. The paperwork was my safety net, not my opening salvo. Before I dropped the hammer, I needed to see exactly what they had done with my $850,000. 3 days later, I drove back to their estate, determined to look Marcus in the eye one last time before I changed the trajectory of his life permanently. I never made it past the driveway. Parked in front of the sweeping 3-car garage was a brand-new, metallic black Porsche 911 Turbo. It gleamed in the spring sunlight, a monument to reckless consumption. Marcus was standing beside it, buffing a non-existent smudge off the hood with a microfiber cloth. "Nice car," I said, rolling down my window. He jumped, startled, before flashing that hollow salesman smile. "Evie, hey, yeah, she's a beauty, isn't she?" "Company vehicle. We needed something with a little more presence for client meetings. It's a business expense. You know how the tax write-offs work. I am a forensic auditor. I know exactly how tax write-offs work, and I know that a $200,000 sports car does not qualify as a legitimate operational expense for a software startup hemorrhaging cash." "Business must be exceptional then," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "Booming, Evie," he said, leaning against the Porsche, completely oblivious to the trap closing around him. "We are absolutely crushing the projections. Never better. Booming. $200,000 of booming parked in a driveway, while my repayment was 2 months delinquent." I smiled, a tight, thin expression. "Glad to hear it, Marcus." I rolled the window up and drove away. The edges of the puzzle were coming together, and the picture they formed was textbook embezzlement. Clara called me the following weekend. Her voice had undergone another calculated transformation, reverting to a cautious, almost brittle sweetness. It was the tone she used when she knew she had pushed a boundary too far and needed to perform maintenance on the relationship so she wouldn't look like the bad guy to our mother. "Evie," she cooed, the artificial warmth practically dripping through the receiver. "I've been thinking about our last conversation, and I feel just awful about how things escalated. The stress has been getting to everyone. Marcus and I want to take you out for dinner. A proper family dinner to clear the air and reconnect. Just us, Mom and Eleanor." We booked a private room at Le Jardin. Le Jardin was an obscenely pretentious French restaurant downtown. The kind of place where the tasting menu cost more than a month's worth of groceries, and the waiters spoke in hushed, reverent tones about truffles. It wasn't a place to clear the air, it was a stage for a performance. "All right, Clara," I said quietly, "I'll be there." I arrived precisely on time, wearing a simple, tailored navy sheath dress, the kind of garment that doesn't draw attention to itself. When I walked into the private dining room, the performance was already underway. Marcus was holding court at the head of the table, a glass of vintage Bordeaux in his hand, laughing loudly at something his mother had said. Clara sat beside him, draped in silk, radiating the smug satisfaction of a woman who believes she has successfully managed a minor inconvenience. Our mother was looking at Marcus with unfiltered adoration, hanging on his every word. "Evie, so glad you could grace us with your presence," Marcus declared, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Sit, sit, we were just ordering." The dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare masquerading as a celebration. They didn't talk about the loan, they didn't apologize for the phone calls or the isolation. Instead, they talked exclusively about money, specifically, their money. They ordered the most expensive items on the menu: the Wagyu beef, the imported caviar, the reserve wine that the sommelier handled with white gloves. Clara loudly discussed the interior designer they had hired for their summer house in Carmel. Eleanor chimed in with complaints about the waitlist for the exclusive country club they were joining. Throughout the entire 2-hour ordeal, they acted as if I were a distant, slightly embarrassing acquaintance they had magnanimously allowed to join their table. They asked no questions about my life, my work, or the consulting firm I was supposed to be purchasing. I was merely the audience for their success. I ate my sea bass in silence, sipping sparkling water, watching the terrifying delusion they had built for themselves. They truly believed their own hype. Then came the grand finale. Marcus clinked his knife against his wine glass, standing up to deliver a prepared speech. "I wanted to bring you all together tonight," he said, his chest puffed out with self-importance, "to make an official announcement. Apex Pay has secured the lead investor for our Series B funding round. Next month, we are hosting a massive gala at the Silicon Valley Tech Innovation Summit to officially close the deal. 200 guests, press, venture capitalists, the works. It's the final step. After this, we go global." My mother gasped in delight, clapping her hands. Eleanor beamed. Clara looked at me, a sharp, triumphant gleam in her eye. "Isn't it wonderful, Evie?" she asked, her tone laced with venom. "Marcus is building an empire. It just goes to show what happens when you surround yourself with people who actually believe in your vision, rather than people who try to drag you down over petty details." I didn't flinch. I dabbed my mouth with the linen napkin. "Congratulations, Marcus," I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "It sounds like a very lucrative step." The waiter arrived then, carrying a leather folio containing the bill. He approached Marcus, the obvious host of the evening. Marcus patted his tailored jacket pockets with exaggerated surprise. "Oh, damn it," he chuckled. "I left my platinum card in the Porsche." "Clara, babe, do you have your wallet?" Clara made a show of digging through her designer clutch, sighing dramatically. "No, I left mine on the console at home. I thought you were paying." Eleanor let out a delicate little laugh. Oh, the stress of high finance, always forgetting the little things. They all turned to look at me. The silence in the private room was sudden and absolute. The trap had been sprung, Evie, Clara said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Would you mind handling this one? Think of it as your contribution to the celebration. After all, Marcus is the one who's going to be supporting the family once the Series B closes. You really haven't contributed much to the startup's growth lately." I looked at the leather folio. I looked at Marcus's arrogant smirk. I looked at Clara's challenging glare. They were waiting for me to crack. They were waiting for me to cause a scene, to bring up the $850,000 in front of our mother, so they could instantly pivot and brand me a hysterical, money-obsessed lunatic who was ruining their special night. They wanted the narrative. I didn't give it to them. I reached into my understated handbag, pulled out my own understated credit card, and handed it to the waiter. "Of course," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "I'll handle it." The bill was $2,800. I signed the receipt without a tremble in my fingers. Marcus grinned, a flash of white teeth in the dim light. "Thanks, Evie. We'll get you next time." "I'm sure you will," I replied softly. I walked out of Le Jardin into the cool night air. I didn't feel humiliated. I felt illuminated. The dinner hadn't been about clearing the air. It had been a test, They wanted to see if I was thoroughly broken, if I had accepted my role as their subservient, invisible financier. My silence to them confirmed their victory. To me, it was simply the gathering of ammunition. The next morning, the ammunition was delivered directly to my inbox. I was sitting in my kitchen, reviewing a complex offshore money laundering case file, when my Google alerts triggered. The alert was for Apex Pay. It was a feature article in a major online tech journal, the kind of publication that venture capitalists read religiously over their morning lattes. There was a high-resolution photo of Marcus, looking intense and visionary, standing in front of a sleek glass whiteboard filled with meaningless equations. The headline made my blood turn to ice. The Bootstrap Billionaire: How Marcus Thorne Built Apex Pay Without a Dime of Outside Debt. I clicked the link. The article was a masterpiece of corporate fiction. Marcus was quoted extensively about the virtues of lean scaling and the importance of financial independence. "We never took on traditional debt," Marcus was quoted as saying in the fourth paragraph. "No bank loans, no desperate borrowing. We built this company organically, with a completely clean balance sheet. It allows us to be agile, and it shows our investors that we have the discipline to manage capital effectively. When we close our Series B next month, our investors know they are backing a company with zero hidden liabilities." I read the paragraph 3 times. I printed it out. I placed it in the cream-colored folder, right next to the promissory note that detailed his $850,000, fully secured, entirely hidden liability. Family doesn't send each other invoices, but a CEO will absolutely lie to a national tech journal and a room full of federal regulators to secure $50 million in venture capital. The grief of losing my sister finally evaporated, leaving behind a sharp, focused anger. They weren't just terrible family members, they were committing federal bank fraud. If Marcus was presenting a clean balance sheet to a Tier 1 investment firm, he was committing a felony. The lie didn't just erase my existence, it weaponized my money to defraud institutional investors. I went back to my laptop. It was time to stop being the invisible sister and start being the senior forensic auditor. I opened an encrypted communication channel to a contact I had at the Securities and Exchange Commission, a woman named Sa, who owed me a favor from a grueling insider trading case we had collaborated on 3 years prior. "Sarah," I typed, "I need you to pull the preliminary filing documents for a Series B funding round regarding a fintech startup called Apex Pay. Specifically, I need to see the balance sheet they submitted to their lead investor, Horizon Ventures." 10 minutes later, the documents were in my secure inbox. I scrolled past the glossy marketing materials and the hockey stick growth projections, straight to the financial disclosures. There it was, in black and white: long-term liabilities, zeros. Secured debt, 0. He had formally declared under penalty of perjury that my loan did not exist. He was using my stolen future as the foundation for a $50 million fraud. I didn't cry. I didn't call Clara to scream. I just smiled, a terrifying silent expression in my empty kitchen. The trap they had set for me was nothing compared to the federal snare they had just walked into blindfolded. I didn't immediately storm into a boardroom or call the FBI. In my profession, you don't detonate a bomb until you have mapped every single wire. If Marcus was brazen enough to lie to a major venture capital firm about an $850,000 debt, he was almost certainly lying about other things. Fraud is rarely an isolated incident, it's usually a lifestyle. Over the next 2 weeks, my dining room table transformed into a war room. I operated with the cold, meticulous precision that had built my career. I pulled state tax filings, cross-referenced shell company registrations in Delaware, and analyzed vendor payments for Apex Pay. I wasn't using classified federal databases for this. I didn't need to. Like I said, arrogant men are sloppy men. They leave a trail of breadcrumbs in the public domain, assuming no one will ever bother to follow them. I followed every single one. What I found was a masterpiece of corporate gluttony. The bridge loan they had begged me for, the money that was supposed to save their servers and secure their beta testing phase had barely touched the company's operational infrastructure. Instead, it had been funneled through a labyrinth of consulting fees and executive compensations right back into their own pockets. The sprawling Silicon Valley estate they were renting? Leased through a subsidiary LLC funded entirely by Apex Pay's working capital. The metallic black Porsche 911 Turbo in the driveway. Categorized as a promotional vehicle. But the truly staggering discoveries were hidden in the travel and entertainment expenses. I tracked the dates of their lavish social media posts against the company's corporate card filings. A $50,000 trip to the Maldives in February, written off as an international networking retreat. A $60,000 Patek Philippe watch Marcus had worn to the dinner at Le Jardin, logged under executive retention bonuses. They hadn't just stolen my inheritance, they had used it to fund a delusion of grandeur, all while treating me like a pathetic, bothersome peasant who had the audacity to ask for her own money back. They had looked at my life savings and decided that a diamond watch and an ocean view villa were more important than my future consulting firm. The sheer audacity of it didn't make me angry anymore. It made me dangerous. I had the complete picture. I had the promissory note, the UCC security filing, the fraudulent balance sheet submitted to Horizon Ventures, and the forensic proof of their embezzlement. I had the hammer, I just needed the perfect anvil. That anvil presented itself 3 days before the Silicon Valley Tech Innovation Gala. I was in my kitchen, brewing a cup of chamomile tea, when the doorbell rang. It was Clara. She looked frantic, her usual polished veneer showing visible cracks. She wasn't carrying a designer handbag. She was clutching a manila folder tight against her chest. "Evie," she said breathlessly as I opened the door. "I need to talk to you. It's urgent." I didn't invite her in. I stood in the doorway, blocking her path, my expression carefully blank. "What is it, Clara?" "Marcus's lawyers just threw a massive curveball at us," she said, words spilling out in a panicked rush. "The Series B funding is ready to close on Saturday at the gala. It's $50 million, Evie. It's the culmination of everything we've worked for. But there's a technicality. The venture capitalist's legal team did a deep dive on some old filings, and they found that silly piece of paper we signed at your table." "You mean the legally binding, secured promissory note for $850,000? I asked quietly. She waved her hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. "Yes, whatever, that thing. Anyway, Horizon Ventures has a strict policy. They have to be the senior debt holder. They won't release the $50 million unless all other debts are either cleared or subordinated. It's totally standard procedure in tech startups, just a boring legal hurdle." She held out the manila folder. Her hands were shaking slightly. "I just need you to sign this waiver, Evie. It's a subordination agreement. It just means you agree to stand in line behind Horizon Ventures. It doesn't mean we won't pay you back, it just means we pay them first if anything goes wrong. Which it won't. We're about to be flush with cash. Once the Series B clears, we'll cut you a check for the whole amount. With interest, I swear." I looked at the folder, but I didn't take it. I knew exactly what a subordination agreement was. If I signed it, I would relinquish my status as the senior secured creditor. I would be handing over my leverage. I would be validating their fraudulent balance sheet, essentially making myself an accessory to their deception. And if, or rather, when Apex Pay collapsed under the weight of Marcus's spending, I would be at the bottom of the bankruptcy barrel, guaranteed to see absolutely nothing. "No," I said simply. Clara blinked, her brain seemingly unable to process the refusal. "No? What do you mean no? Evie, this isn't a negotiation. The entire deal hinges on this signature. If you don't sign this, the investors walk. The company folds. We lose the house, the cars, everything. You would be destroying my life over a technicality." "It isn't a technicality, Clara. It's my future," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "You told me the money was for servers. You bought a Porsche and a Patek Philippe watch. You lied to the federal government. You lied to your investors. And you lied to me. I will not sign away my security to facilitate a $50 million fraud." Her face twisted, the panicked sister vanishing, replaced by the vicious, entitled woman she truly was. "You are insane," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You have always been jealous of me. You sit in this pathetic little house, with your pathetic little data entry job, and you can't stand the fact that Marcus and I are building something incredible. You would rather see us burn than see us succeed. I don't care if you succeed or burn," I told her, the cold fury finally bleeding into my words. "I care about my contract. I am the senior secured creditor. I will not subordinate. I will not waive my rights. And I will not protect you from the consequences of your own arrogance." "Family doesn't do this," she screamed, abandoning all pretense of civility. "You are going to ruin us. You ruined yourselves," I said. "I am simply refusing to pay the bill for the wreckage." I closed the door in her face. I locked the deadbolt. I walked back into my office and picked up the phone. It was time to introduce myself to the people who were about to write Marcus a $50 million check. I found the direct line for Arthur Vance, the managing partner at Horizon Ventures, who was personally overseeing the Apex Pay deal. "I didn't call to negotiate, I called to detonate. I need to correct a small detail before I continue." When I picked up the phone, I wasn't calling a relative. "My name is Evelyn Vance. The managing partner at Horizon Ventures is a man named Arthur Sterling. It is crucial in my line of work to maintain absolute precision with names and corporate structures." Arthur Sterling was known in the Valley as a ruthless, unsentimental kingmaker. He didn't fund dreams. He funded mathematics, and the mathematics Marcus had presented to him were entirely fictional. "Arthur Sterling's office," a crisp voice answered. "This is Evelyn Vance," I said, my tone carrying the quiet, unquestionable authority I utilized in federal briefings. "I need to speak with Mr. Sterling regarding the pending Series B capitalization for Apex Pay. It concerns an undisclosed senior secured debt liability of $850,000 that severely impacts the legality of his impending transaction." There was a pause, the kind of professional hesitation that occurs when a gatekeeper realizes the person on the other end of the line holds a live grenade. "Please hold, Ms. Vance." 40 seconds later, Arthur Sterling was on the line. "Ms. Vance, my legal team mentioned a minor discrepancy on a UCC filing, but I was assured by Marcus Thorne that it was an administrative error currently being expunged. Are you telling me otherwise? I am the senior secured creditor." "Sterling," I replied, the icy calm in my voice cutting through the digital static. "The debt is not an administrative error. It is a legally binding promissory note secured against the entirety of Apex Pay's intellectual property and physical assets. Marcus Thorne has defaulted on his repayment schedule and is actively attempting to subordinate my claim to fraudulently secure your capital." Sterling was silent for a long moment. I could practically hear the gears of his razor-sharp mind recalibrating the risk assessment. "Do you have the documentation to prove this, Ms. Vance?" "I have the original promissory note, the executed UCC security agreement, and a forensic trail indicating massive misappropriation of the initial loan funds," I stated factually. "He didn't use my capital to build servers. He used it to lease a luxury estate and purchase a $200,000 promotional vehicle. If you wire $50 million into his corporate accounts on Saturday, you will not be funding a visionary tech startup. You will be injecting capital into a hollow shell designed to finance a fraudulent lifestyle, and you will be doing so as a secondary creditor to a defaulted loan." "Where are you currently located, Ms. Vance?" Sterling asked, his voice now devoid of any polite pretense. It was the voice of a predator realizing another predator was in its territory. "I am in Seattle," I said. "The gala is in 48 hours in San Francisco," Sterling said sharply. "I am not going to blow up a $50 million deal based on a phone call, but I can't sign term sheets with liars. Bring your documentation to the Silicon Valley Tech Innovation Summit. Do not speak to the press. Do not alert Marcus Thorne. I want to see the paperwork with my own eyes before the ink dries on my contract." "I will be there," I promised. I hung up the phone. The trap was no longer a theoretical construct. The jaws were locked open, waiting for Marcus to step inside. I spent the next day preparing for the execution. My usual wardrobe consisted of sensible, invisible clothing, the armor of a woman who wanted to move through the world unnoticed. But Saturday was not going to be an ordinary day. I was not going as the mousy sister who filed paperwork in a basement. I was going as the senior forensic auditor, who was about to dismantle an empire. I went to a high-end boutique downtown, a place I had never dared to enter before. I bypassed the flashy, brightly colored gowns that Clara would have gravitated toward. I sought out something entirely different. I purchased a tailored floor-length gown in a shade of midnight blue, so dark it almost absorbed the light. It was elegant, severe, and possessed an architectural sharpness that commanded immediate respect. It was the sartorial equivalent of a drawn sword. I paired it with simple stiletto heels and swept my hair back into a severe, flawless twist. When I looked in the mirror, the woman staring back was a stranger to my family, but she was deeply familiar to me. She was the woman who had frozen offshore accounts with a single signature. She was the woman who didn't negotiate with fraudsters. She was cold fury incarnate. I booked a first-class flight to San Francisco for Saturday morning. The entire journey was a study in profound, eerie stillness. While my sister was likely hyperventilating over floral arrangements, and Marcus was practicing his triumphant acceptance speech, I was quietly reviewing the UCC codes and the federal statutes regarding wire fraud. The Silicon Valley Tech Innovation Gala was held at a massive, ultra-modern convention center overlooking the bay. It was a spectacle of excess. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the sunset, while inside, hundreds of venture capitalists, tech journalists, and aspiring billionaires mingled under cascades of modern art installations. Waiters carried trays of champagne that cost more per bottle than my monthly mortgage. I arrived an hour after the event began, carrying a sleek black leather briefcase instead of a clutch. The briefcase held the original cream-colored folder. I bypassed the red carpet where Marcus had undoubtedly posed for photographs earlier. I moved through the crowded ballroom like a phantom, my midnight blue gown, parting the sea of tuxedoed men and glittering women. I spotted them near the center of the room, standing beneath a massive digital banner that read, Apex Pay, the future of frictionless finance. The family was assembled in full force. Clara was wearing a shimmering gold dress that looked incredibly heavy, dripping with diamonds she couldn't afford. Marcus was in a bespoke velvet tuxedo, holding a glass of champagne, surrounded by a circle of sycophantic junior investors. My mother was there too, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, overwhelmed by the sheer proximity to wealth. And Eleanor, Marcus's mother, was holding court, loudly telling anyone who would listen about her son's innate genius. They looked triumphant. They looked unassailable. They looked like people who had successfully erased a bothersome relative from their pristine narrative. I stood in the shadows near a massive structural pillar, watching them celebrate my destruction. I didn't feel a trace of sadness. I felt only the deep, resonant hum of impending justice. Arthur Sterling was standing a few yards away from Marcus, speaking quietly with two lawyers. He possessed the quiet, menacing gravity of a man who held the keys to the kingdom. He checked his watch, his expression grim. I stepped out from the shadow of the pillar and walked directly toward him. The moment I entered the light, the dynamic of the room began to subtly shift. I wasn't wearing a name tag. I wasn't trying to pitch an app. I moved with a terrifying, absolute purpose. People instinctively stepped out of my way. Clara was the first to see me. Her laughter died abruptly, her champagne glass freezing halfway to her lips. She blinked, her brain struggling to reconcile the sleek, formidable woman in the midnight blue gown with the quiet sister she had screamed at 2 days prior. She nudged Marcus frantically. Marcus turned, his charismatic smile faltered, replaced by a flash of genuine, unadulterated panic. He recognized the look in my eyes. It wasn't the look of a victim, it was the look of an executioner. I ignored them entirely. I walked straight up to Arthur Sterling. I did not extend my hand. I opened the black leather briefcase, withdrew the cream-colored folder and handed it to him. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice carrying clearly over the hum of the ballroom. Here is the documentation regarding the senior secured debt liability of Apex Pay. The promissory note, the executed UCC security agreement, and the forensic proof of financial misappropriation. Arthur Sterling took the folder. He didn't look at Marcus. He opened the file and began to read. Right there in the middle of the glittering gala, as the empire Marcus had built on lies began to systematically disintegrate into ash. The silence that descended upon our immediate vicinity was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that precedes a catastrophic structural collapse. Arthur Sterling did not rush. He was a man who understood the immense gravity of the documents he held in his hands. He opened the cream-colored folder and began to read. He examined the promissory note, tracing the stark, undeniable lines of Marcus's flamboyant signature. He scrutinized the uniform's commercial code filing, noting the official county seal and the filing date that preceded Horizon Ventures' involvement by 18 months. Then, he turned to the forensic analysis I had compiled, the undeniable evidence of luxury cars, exotic vacations, and a sprawling estate, all financed by the very capital that was supposed to be building a secure technological infrastructure. As Sterling read, Marcus finally broke, the sheer panic overriding his carefully cultivated facade of Silicon Valley nonchalance. He practically sprinted across the ballroom floor, his velvet tuxedo suddenly looking absurdly out of place, like a costume on a desperate actor who had just forgotten all of his lines. Clara followed closely behind him, her gold dress swishing frantically, her face entirely drained of color. Arthur, hold on," Marcus stammered, his voice loud enough to turn heads at the neighboring tables. Several tech journalists, smelling blood in the water, began to drift closer, their digital recorders casually slipping out of their pockets. This is a massive misunderstanding. She's my sister-in-law. This is a family matter. It's completely blown out of proportion. Arthur Sterling did not look up from the folder. Is this your signature, Marcus? He asked, his voice low and dangerous, pointing a manicured finger at the bottom of the promissory note. Marcus swallowed hard, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. Yes, but Arthur, you have to understand, it wasn't a real corporate debt, it was seed money. From family. Family doesn't operate on these kinds of strict draconian timelines. She's just confused. She doesn't understand high-level business mechanics. She's upset about a personal issue, and she's trying to cause a scene. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on the black leather briefcase. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. When you hold all the cards, you don't need to shout. I understand business mechanics perfectly, Marcus, I said, my voice slicing through his frantic babbling like a scalpel. I am a senior forensic auditor for the Federal Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I understand that when a CEO submits a financial disclosure to a venture capital firm claiming zero long-term liabilities while actively defaulting on an $850,000 secured loan, that is not a misunderstanding. That is federal wire fraud. The collective intake of breath from the surrounding journalist was audible. The word federal possesses a unique magic in rooms filled with billionaires. It instantly vaporizes the illusion of invincibility. Clara, desperate and terrified, lunged forward, grabbing my arm. Her diamond bracelets clinked together aggressively. Evie, stop it. Have you lost your mind? You are humiliating us in front of the entire industry. You are destroying everything we built over a petty grudge. Tell him it's a mistake. Tell him right now. I looked down at her hand on my arm, my expression so terrifyingly blank that she recoiled as if she had touched a live wire. You built an empire on my stolen future, Clara, I said, my tone completely devoid of sisterly affection. You asked me for a bridge loan to save your servers, and you bought a metallic black Porsche and a $60,000 watch. You lived in a mansion funded by my inheritance, while attempting to legally erase my existence to secure $50 million from Mr. Sterling. The only mistake I made was believing that blood meant loyalty. Eleanor, Marcus's mother, had finally pushed her way through the gathering crowd. She looked horrified, not by the revelation of her son's fraud, but by the public spectacle of it all. Evelyn, she shrieked, her aristocratic poise completely shattered. You are an absolute disgrace. How dare you come here and try to extort your own family? Real family doesn't bring lawsuits to a gala. I didn't even turn my head to acknowledge her. She was a non-entity, a footnote in the collapse of her son's fraudulent kingdom. My eyes remained locked on Arthur Sterling. Sterling finally closed the cream-colored folder. He looked at Marcus, and the expression on his face was one of absolute unadulterated disgust. It was the look of a man who had almost stepped in something foul, and was furious at himself for not noticing it sooner. "Arthur, please," Marcus begged, the charismatic visionary completely gone, replaced by a terrified con artist facing the collapse of his house of cards. "We can fix this, we can restructure the debt, we can pay her off from the initial capital injection. The technology is still solid, the user base is growing. Don't let a family squabble kill a billion-dollar unicorn." "A unicorn," Sterling repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "You lied to me on a federal disclosure document, Marcus. You hid a nearly $1 million secured liability, you misappropriated funds to finance a Playboy lifestyle, and you brought an active federal investigator into my deal flow." Sterling handed the folder back to me. He adjusted his suit jacket, his face a mask of granite. "Horizon Ventures is officially withdrawing from the Series B capitalization," he announced, his voice ringing out clearly in the now silent ballroom. "The term sheet is void, effective immediately. Furthermore, my legal team will be contacting the SEC in the morning regarding the fraudulent financial disclosures you submitted during our diligence period. Do not ever attempt to contact my firm again." Marcus physically stumbled backward as if he had been struck. "No, no, Arthur. You can't do this, you're killing the company. If you pull out, everyone pulls out. We won't be able to make payroll on Monday. The servers will go dark. We'll lose everything." "You already lost it, Marcus," Sterling said coldly. "You lost it the moment you decided your arrogance was a substitute for accounting." He turned his back on Marcus, nodded respectfully to me, and walked away, his legal team trailing behind him like a phalanx. The fallout was instantaneous. The journalists were already typing furiously on their phones. The news of Horizon Ventures violently pulling out of the Apex Pay deal, spreading through the ballroom faster than a virus. The sycophantic junior investors, who had been orbiting Marcus just minutes prior, were suddenly backing away, treating him like a biohazard. Clara fell to her knees, right there on the polished hardwood floor of the convention center, the heavy gold dress pooling around her. She wasn't crying the strategic, manipulative tears she had used in my living room. She was weeping with genuine, horrific despair. "Evie, please," she sobbed, looking up at me. Her makeup completely ruined. "Please, we'll do anything, we'll sell the cars, we'll move out of the house, just tell them it was a mistake. Give us a chance to fix it." I looked down at my sister, the woman who had called me selfish for wanting my own money back. The woman who had told her mother-in-law that I didn't need my inheritance because my life was too small to warrant it. The woman who had tried to trick me into signing away my security so she could continue to live a lie. "Family doesn't send each other invoices, Clara," I said, my voice a quiet lethal whisper that only she and Marcus could hear. "But I am not family anymore. I am the senior secured creditor, and I am calling the debt." I turned away from my sister, my midnight blue gown sweeping across the floor. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see Marcus desperately trying to perform CPR on a corpse, nor did I need to see Clara weeping over the loss of her unearned luxury. I walked out of the Silicon Valley Tech Innovation Gala exactly as I had entered, silent, untroubled and absolute. The cool San Francisco night air felt incredible against my skin. I hailed a cab, went to my hotel and slept for 8 solid hours. It was the best sleep I had experienced in 18 months. The destruction of Apex Pay was not a slow decline, it was a violent, spectacular implosion. When a venture capital firm, like Horizon Ventures, loudly and publicly withdraws from a Series B funding round citing financial irregularities, the rest of the financial ecosystem reacts with terrifying speed. By Monday morning, the news had hit the major financial blogs. The headline in the tech journal that had praised Marcus as a bootstrap billionaire just a week prior was swiftly updated to a far less flattering piece regarding allegations of undisclosed debt and SEC investigations. The sycophants vanished. The secondary investors, who had been clamoring for a piece of the action, scattered like roaches when the kitchen light is turned on. But the real devastation didn't come from the press, it came from the paperwork. As the senior secured creditor, I exercised my rights under the default clause of the promissory note. I didn't do this personally, of course. I hired a specialized corporate asset recovery firm, the kind of ruthless clinical lawyers who don't care about family dynamics or tears. They care about liquidation. On Tuesday, the recovery firm filed the necessary injunctions. By Wednesday, the asset seizures began. Because my loan was secured against all physical and intellectual property of ApexPay, and because Marcus had foolishly used the company accounts to finance his personal lifestyle, almost everything was subject to recovery. The metallic black Porsche 911 Turbo, the promotional vehicle that Marcus had so proudly polished in his driveway, was towed away by a flatbed truck before noon. The corporate accounts were frozen, meaning the payroll for their small staff of developers bounced, prompting an immediate exodus of their remaining talent. The sprawling Silicon Valley's estate, leased through the company's subsidiary, went into immediate default. Clara and Marcus were given 72 hours to vacate the premises. I heard through the family grapevine, which was now operating at a fever pitch of hysterical gossip, that Eleanor had to rent them a U-Haul truck because their personal credit cards had been maxed out trying to maintain the illusion of wealth. The SEC investigation initiated by Arthur Sterling's legal team was the final nail in the coffin. When federal regulators audited the books, they didn't just find my undisclosed $850,000 loan. They found the $50,000 Maldivian vacation. They found the $60,000 Patek Philippe watch. They found a systemic pattern of wire fraud and embezzlement that went far beyond mere financial mismanagement. Marcus wasn't just a failed entrepreneur, he was facing serious federal indictments. I watched the collapse from the quiet sanctuary of my Seattle townhouse, sipping chamomile tea and reviewing the recovery firm's updates. I didn't feel vindictive, I didn't feel a wicked sense of triumph, I simply felt the deep, profound satisfaction of a ledger being balanced. They had gambled my future on the assumption that I was too weak to collect. They lost the liquidation of ApexPay's remaining assets, the proprietary source code, the server hardware, and the auctioning of the luxury items took several months. It was a tedious bureaucratic process, but the outcome was never in doubt. Because I held the senior secured position, I was the first one paid from the liquidated estate. I recovered my initial $850,000, plus the accrued 6% interest, and all associated legal fees. I did not lose a single penny. With my capital returned, I executed my original plan. I purchased the independent forensic consulting firm I had been eyeing. I resigned from my government position and became my own boss. My firm now specializes in tracing hidden assets in high-net-worth divorce cases and corporate embezzlement scandals. I am very good at my job, I understand exactly how fraudsters think, and I know exactly where they hide their money, because I have seen it up close. My life is quiet, structured, and entirely my own. I still drive my reliable 5-year-old sedan. Not because I have to, but because I prefer it. I don't need a Porsche to validate my existence. As for my family, the silence is deafening, and I welcome it. My mother, who had worshipped Marcus's artificial success, no longer calls me to subtly criticize my life choices. Eleanor, the woman who claimed I was shaming my sister over money, has entirely retreated from our social circles, deeply embarrassed by her son's impending criminal trial. Clara sent me a text message about 6 months after the gala. It was a long, rambling paragraph about how difficult things were, how Marcus was facing jail time, how they were living in a tiny two-bedroom apartment, and how she missed her big sister. It ended with a plea. I know we made mistakes, Evie. But can we please just put this behind us? I need my family. I read the message while sitting at the mahogany desk in my new corner office. I thought about the tears she had shed when she begged for the money. I thought about the time she called me selfish for asking for it back. I thought about the moment she tried to trick me into signing away my security so she could continue to fund her fraudulent life. I typed a single sentence in reply. Family doesn't send each other invoices, Clara, but the consequences of fraud always come due. I blocked her number. I have not spoken to her since. Some bridges are not meant to be repaired. They are meant to be burned, so that you never make the mistake of crossing them again. If you are watching this, and you are the quiet sibling, the responsible daughter, the family member, who is constantly asked to sacrifice your own stability for someone else's chaotic ambition, listen to me carefully. Your silence is not a requirement of love. Your financial security is not a slush fund for their delusions. If someone asks you for money, demand the paperwork. Secure the loan, register the filings. Do not let the word family be used as a weapon to strip you of your boundaries. The people who genuinely love you will never ask you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. And the people who become furious when you ask them to honor their commitments are simply revealing that they never intended to honor them in the first place. Never be afraid to walk away from a toxic table, and never, ever be afraid to call the debt. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if you believe in holding people accountable, no matter who they are. And remember, the most dangerous person in the room is rarely the one making the loudest noise. It's the one quietly taking notes. A few years have passed since the events at the Silicon Valley Tech Innovation Gala. My independent forensic consulting firm has grown far beyond my initial projections. I now employ a team of brilliant women who understand the critical importance of uncovering the truth hidden within complex financial structures. We specialize in cases where individuals have been financially disenfranchised by manipulative spouses or unscrupulous business partners. We ensure that no one is ever forced to walk away empty-handed simply because they were told that family doesn't send invoices. Looking back, the most profound lesson I learned wasn't about federal law or venture capital. It was about the power of silence. The people who underestimate you will always misinterpret your silence as submission. But silence is a canvas. It is the quiet space where you meticulously build your defense, gather your evidence, and prepare the perfect, unassailable strike. Do not let their noise intimidate you. Do not engage in their dramatic performances. Let them weave their intricate webs of deception. While they are busy building empires on sand, you focus on the concrete facts. My sister and her husband believed they were the main characters in a triumphant success story, completely unaware that they were merely the subjects of a forensic audit. They paid the price for their arrogance, and I secured my future with the very tools they had dismissed as insignificant. Thank you again for listening to my story. Your support means the world to me. Keep your records straight, keep your emotions in check, and never forget the immense power of a quiet, calculated truth. I will see you all in the next video. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and never apologize for protecting what is yours.